Sten, we're live.
Hey, thank you, Larry the Liberty Guy. Welcome to a special Saturday morning edition of Breakfast in the Dugout. Today, we're going to go extra innings by providing with the first deep dive interview. I mean, a really in-depth interview with Nicole Solas, the South Kingston mom who continues to garner national media attention after the South Kingston School Committee and their teacher union allies, their friends over there, threatened to sue her and then actually pulled the trigger just recently on a lawsuit against Nicole. All because she asked too many questions about the curriculum her child would receive in the South Kingston Public School District. In just a few minutes, you're going to hear from Nicole, who will be joined by her lawyer from the prestigious Goldwater Institute in Arizona. Speaking of media, it's just a shame that the local media doesn't want to cover the story. None of the local television networks have covered this story where a union is actually suing a parent. This is big national news, but with our stick your head in the sand local media, it's not worthy news. Unbelievable. And as you've undoubtedly seen on so many news reports over the last number of months, in town after town in Rhode Island and across America and state after state, parents are rising up and speaking out against the anti-American critical race theory principles that are being forced upon vulnerable students and unsuspecting parents. Indeed, for most of the past year, CRT advocates are trying to hide their secret. This stealth approach to implementing, extreme left Marxist ideas has become the preferred method of the entire American left, from destructive climate change policies to absurd gender fluidity and sexual beliefs, and now to historically inaccurate and highly divisive race-based U.S. history teachings. It is clear that the left's agenda is highly unpopular with the public. So, radical activists must resort to underhanded ways to sneak their agenda through with as little public scrutiny as possible. But thanks to recent public admissions by national teacher unions, both of them, who now openly express that they are supportive of critical race theory in schools, the secret is now out, especially now when it comes to public education. Parents are outraged and they are taking a stand. But the woke left refuses to be transparent about their intentions, often resorting to thuggish and sometimes illegal tactics to hide their true intentions. Tactics like trying to bully and intimidate parents via lawsuits, not complying with open records requests, and purposely violating open meetings laws. All three of these tactics, as it turns out, were used against Nicole Solas, who you're going to meet in just a moment, along with her lawyer. And speaking of lawyers, a legal American cavalry is coming to the rescue to aid these common sense families and parents in their quest for curriculum transparency. A national network of liberty lawyers, of pro-liberty lawyers, has been activated and is springing into action, coming to the defense of good-willed parents and assisting them at no fee, pro bono, if you will, to force the truth to be exposed to the public. And joining me now is Nicole Solas and Jonathan Riches. Welcome to In the Dugout, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
Let's start, Nicole. You are the South Kingston mom who's gained national media attention with just for asking some questions about curriculum for your daughter. Everybody knows your story. You're also the leader of a group, Rhode Island Parents Against Indoctrination. But this story just seems to go on and on and on. It keeps unfolding. It seems to be more involved and outrageous every week. Without telling the whole story, is this what you expected when you started this journey?
No, of course not. I mean, I don't think anyone could have ever predicted this, especially because I did what the school told me to do, which was submit public records requests. And it ultimately led to them threatening to sue me. And now the teacher union actually suing me. I mean, as of like June 2nd, maybe then was when I submitted my last public record request. I mean, I haven't done anything, that they would consider to be offensive for like 2.5 months. And yet they keep coming at me.
Well, in a few minutes, we're going to start telling your whole story and getting your personal perspective and the perspective of Jonathan Riches. Jonathan, you are the Director of National Litigation for the Goldwater Institute, Sharf Norton Center for Constitutional Litigation. Goldwater Institute is a peer of my group, a much bigger peer, a much bigger sister than my group, the Goldwater Institute. You're also General Counsel for the Goldwater Institute. Just tell us quickly first about your legal institute. You guys provide basically pro bono support for citizens who are having their rights infringed upon.
Yeah, exactly. We're almost set up precisely for cases just like this. So Goldwater's been around for a while, about 30 years, set up in 1988. And we were a traditional think tank for most of that time. And then in 2007, as you know, Mike, Clint Bolick came on board, set up our public interest litigation shop. And that's proven to be a really effective model because you have under one roof the ability to do public policy, legislative proposals, and public interest litigation. And many issues, a lot of those things overlap. This one is certainly one of those issues when we're talking about academic transparency and then holding the government accountable and defending against special interest abuse. This kind of hits every note.
And it's so great to know that you and the whole network of conservative and freedom-based public interest litigation firms are out there. As you know, our guest who's coming up in about 20, 30 minutes, Judge Robert Flanders, is on our board, and we're looking to start something similar in our center. So more word on that to our fans in the near future. Nicole, back to you. So I saw you last night just flipping through the channels. There you are on the Laura Ingraham show, The Angle. I know you've been all over the place. You and John, you guys have been a great job getting the word out, and you're a hero, to many in this state, and I imagine across the country. What's that like to go from just a few months ago, right? You're just an inquiring mom, and now you're a national media star.
Yeah, it doesn't feel that way because I still just, get up and take care of my kids and go to the grocery store. I hope that it has a real impact. I hope that means more people are going to be doing what I'm doing and they don't just wait for someone else to do something like this.
Well, we also know that with that exposure and fame, if you want to call it, comes criticism from the left. You've got a target on your back. The teachers' unions, the school committee are trying to smear you. They're suing you now. We're going to get into that in just a minute. Before I go back to John for the legal side of that, I mean, it's all designed to intimidate you and to bully you, if you would. Is it getting concerning to you to the point where you might have to slow down and back off a little bit?
No, I don't care. I think it's repulsive and annoying, but it's certainly not something that I'm afraid of. I mean, I have contempt for it. I don't have fear of it.
Very well put. Jonathan, I know it's not the meat of what we're going to talk about here in a second, but it is a legal question. So with the attacks on Nicole, they've come from local radio hosts here to school committee members to you guys would know better than me, who else? Are any of them running at risk of, slander, libel, anything like that with these kinds of accusations, unfounded? It's obviously for political purposes and it's obviously on purpose. I'm sure you guys as her counsel, I'm sure you're keeping a close eye out for that as well.
Yeah, and some of the stuff is getting, close to the line. Libel, defamation actions are high standards, but of course, stuff is untruthful, and it can get real close to that line. But look, I mean, thank God that there's people like Nicole out there. If it wasn't for Nicole, this issue would have been closed a long time ago. It requires people just like her willing to stand up and fight.
With that segue, let's go to the beginning. So in the beginning, like you said, Nicole, you just wanted you're sending your daughter, we'll get to that later. You're planning to send your daughter to South Kingstown public schools. You wanted to find out about the curriculum. They said you got to put it in public records request form. You did. You made many of them. What was, and then they threatened to sue you. What was so outrageous about what you were asking of them?
Well, first they said it was just the number that they thought was outrageous. And then it wasn't until I get to the meeting that they wanted to get into the content of what I was asking about. And they were very clear that they saw it as a political attack on them. So merely asking questions about what they are teaching, they see as such a threat that they can't even engage in public debate about what they're doing. Instead of doing that, they have to shut it down. And that to me says that they can't overcome a challenge on the merits of the ideology that they're teaching.
And we're going to get more into that transparency public debate in just a minute. Jonathan, we were happy to have played a role in matching you up with Nicole because you and I are all part of the same network of think tanks and litigation centers. So after you represented Nicole, you guys put in a sort of reworked all her APRA requests. And the school committee, am I reading this right, came back to you and said it would cost you $74,000 to fulfill the requests?
Yeah, you are reading that right. And thanks, Mike, for everything you've done for this case as well. But yeah, so Nicole and us sat down and we chatted about what were the outstanding requests, what was kind of the information we were still looking to receive. We put together a new sort of comprehensive public records request, sent it to the school district, and there you have it there on your screen. This was just for one piece of it. This was just for teacher emails that asked for specific, discrete subjects. So this information should be readily available, easily attainable, basic keyword search in their email system. Rather than give us the records, they said it's going to be $74,000 to turn them over.
Now, we'll talk about this more later on with Judge Flanders, but I mean, aren't they supposed to reasonable costs? Right. Isn't that sort of like in the law?
Yeah, that's exactly the word that's in the law. The law allows for fees to be charged, but the fees have to be reasonable. And it's hard to imagine on what planet $74,000 for specific discrete emails is reasonable.
All right, so just one more follow-up quickly on this topic. So Nicole, have you gotten any responses based on these reissued APRA requests with Jonathan's help?
No, I haven't received responses to Jonathan's submission. No, and just one note about the estimates. They gave me a $9,000 estimate for a request for emails, and when I challenged it, and I said, well, this is how I would calculate it, it dropped down to $75. So that tells you what a joke these estimates are.
And then they raise it to $74,000.
Right, and then Jonathan submits something for
Jonathan, this is clearly an attempt by this government entity to subvert the law, to not respond to the people who they work for. This has been going on in Rhode Island for many years. Once they learn this trick of overcharging people for APRA requests, it's like caught wildfire. Nobody can get a request fulfilled anymore if it's at all controversial, has any meat on the bones at all. Is this happening in other parts of the country as well?
Similar things are happening elsewhere. What's really nice about each individual state is most of them have really robust public records laws, open meetings laws, where it's pretty clear that this information should be public. There's a presumption in favor of disclosure. Fees, if they can be assessed at all, generally got to be, like in Rhode Island, reasonable. But we are seeing obstruction by school districts, by other government entities that don't want to comply with the law or open up the public's business.
And how would you rate Rhode Island's records request laws compared to other state laws you've seen? Not as robust?
There's some exemptions in there that aren't great. I'll give you one example. There's a exemption that exempts out communications of elected officials, which to me was somewhat mind-blowing.
Communications of elected officials.
Right. So obviously, if the public has a right to know anything, it has a right to know what its public officials are doing, what they're discussing, with whom they're discussing it. And Rhode Island's law exempts that out almost entirely. So that's an area that can and should be addressed at the legislature as soon as possible.
All right, so that's the public request, public records requests aspect of your story, Nicole. Next, we discovered, and wasn't aware of this till after you started working with Goldwater, that there might have also been a violation. So not only are they dropping the ball and responding to your records request, they might have had a violation of the open meetings access laws as well, where any meeting of a government entity is supposed to be public with public able to participate. Tell us how that, your initial forays into that, what they said, and then we'll ask John about the legal side of it.
Right. I learned from a news article that they have a BIPOC committee, which stands for Black, Indigenous, Person of Color. They're supposed to be reviewing policies and curriculum under the lens of anti-racism, which is another code word for critical race theory. I asked to go to their meetings. They told me they were closed. And so I filed a complaint with
This is a public board.
It's a public board. They were approved by the school committee. They got public funding. They are
Has members of the school committee on it, doesn't it?
I don't know if there's a member of the school committee on it, but
Okay.
there are voting members that are on other subcommittees
Okay.
under the school committee. The fact that they get money really blew my mind. They're getting my tax dollars and they won't let me come to a meeting.
Did you try to go online or in person? How did you try to attend, and what did they say?
Well, they're not posting any notices of meetings. I just saw that there was a person leading it named Robin Wildman. So I emailed her directly, asking to come, and she said no.
So Jonathan, from a legal perspective, we've heard stories around here and other places that even if two, like in this case, let's just say school committee members just talk about an issue offline on their own privately, or bring a third person, I don't know if it's 2 or 3 people, that could be considered a public meeting and a violation. This is clear, right? Public funding, formed by a public school committee, yet the public is being kept out. Is there, so I assume this would be a state Open Meetings Act, again, a state law that is in question here?
Yep. Yeah. And it doesn't seem like a close question to me at all. The legal question is this BIPOC advisory board a public body? And as you said, as Nicole said, they're publicly funded. 2 members are on a voting subcommittee. They meet regularly. They discuss issues of significant public concern, namely policies ranging from hiring, discipline, anti-discrimination, essentially every policy that touches the school committee, they're discussing every single week, getting paid with taxpayer dollars to discuss it. Plainly, it's a public body, should have been open to Nicole. And Nicole right now has an open complaint with the Rhode Island Attorney General.
Yeah, I want to get to that complaint in a second.
Sure.
So Nicole, so let me bring up a post from Goldwater on this and then ask you, so what do you think they're hiding by not allowing you to go, or anyone else to go to these meetings?
They don't want me to challenge what they're doing, because what they're doing is making policies racist. And I have told them directly that what they're doing is violating various laws. So they just don't want to hear from me, and they don't want to hear from other people that disagree with what they do. And I even said to Robin Wildman, why won't you let me into your meeting and put me at ease? Because you must know that what you're doing is controversial. So why not let me see and be convinced by you? And they're not open. They do not want to engage dissent. And that's not the role of a public body. They have to engage dissent.
So Jonathan, I'm going to be sharing right now a posting of your actual complaint you filed with the Attorney General's office, and there it is on your letterhead. Tell us about the formal complaint you filed and what response you've received so far.
Sure. Yeah. So actually, Nicole initially filed a complaint with the Attorney General's office, and then she asked if we'd be able to help with that process. So we've submitted essentially a full legal analysis supported by the evidentiary materials that Nicole was able to marshal, essentially pointing to every factor that establishes that this advisory board is in fact a public body. The law is abundantly clear that it's a public body. That has all been submitted. It's now under consideration by the Attorney General's office. And
any response at all yet?
They've received all of the materials, so they're conducting their investigation now, and we should receive a response I would assume sometime in the near future.
Could be months.
Hard to say. Now, interestingly, Nicole had a separate complaint she filed involving some of the timelines for open meetings, and the Attorney General found, in fact, substantiated her complaint, found that the same board had violated the open meeting law, and they turned that around in, I believe, 2 or 3 months, right, Nicole?
Yeah, I think it was actually even like a month or so.
Oh,
Yeah.
was it that quickly?
I think it was pretty fast. Yeah.
Yeah. So hopefully it'll be faster than that.
Wow. All right. Nicole, one thing I think, I've sort of known it from a legislative point of view, but boy, the wheels of justice turn awful slowly, don't they? It must be frustrating for you to see such obvious violations, whether it's the APRA laws or the open meeting laws, and just things take so darn long. In the meantime, this stuff is happening in our schools. It must be very frustrating.
Well, yeah, that slow slog to justice is ultimately what, made me take my daughter out of school. The whole reason why I started asking questions is because I was trying to make an enrollment decision. And the school dragged their feet so much and then really ended up showing me their true colors that I had to take her out. I couldn't wait to see what their answers were anymore because their non-answers.
All right, I'm going to ask you specifically about that at the very end of our interview. We'll quickly cover that. All right, so before we get to the big issue, they've actually sued you now. First, they threatened to sue you and then decided not to. But then they decided to sue you. Why do you think they changed their mind, Nicole?
Because they're trying to circumvent the Access to Public Records Act by suing me. And they found another
Do
way.
you think it was when you brought in Goldwater, they said, boy, we got to get serious and we got to fight back with all guns blazing?
No, I think they were planning to do this regardless of my representation, because when they were giving me my public records responses, which were non-responses, most of them said, we can't give you documents. They were numbering them at the bottom of the page. So they were like keeping track of my numbers here. And I knew that was a strategic move. So I wasn't quite sure what they were going to do with those numbers, but now it makes sense that they were, tracking every move as if I'm some enemy of the state.
All right. So Jonathan, just to be clear here, this suit was brought by the NEA of Rhode Island, the teachers union?
Right. That's a crucial distinction. A private party like the teachers union has no process in Rhode Island's public records statutory scheme, right? The people that are involved are the records requester, Nicole, and the public entity, the school committee. Some third party like the union doesn't have any role to play there. The fact that they've come in and have sued Nicole is completely at odds with the law. They don't have standing.
So would you be saying they don't have standing to bring this lawsuit?
No, they do not have standing to bring this lawsuit.
In your opinion?
No, that's the Rhode Island Supreme Court's opinion. There is very clear precedent on this question, which has been reaffirmed time and again.
In prior decisions, but not this case hasn't been decided yet, right?
Right.
In that regard? Okay.
In prior decisions, that the remedy that is available under the public records law is to the records requester. It's not to independent third parties that want to muck up the public's access to open government.
All right. All right. A lot of angles I want to cover on this. Let me go here first. Let's stay with, so Nicole was actually named. Let's stay with Jonathan first. Nicole was actually named as a defendant in this. Why, A, and related B, is she at any personal risk as a defendant?
The why is anybody's guess. The union has no ability to bring this case, period. My suspicion is that it is purely an intimidation and harassment technique. They're trying to scare her. That's why they named her as a defendant. And of course, when you're named as a defendant in a civil case, that comes with a whole host of obligations, responsibilities, costs, timelines, potential discovery issues. It's a way to effectively scare Nicole into submission. Fortunately, it's not going to work for Nicole. And is your firm, is Goldwater's legal firm, and you representing her in that regard as well? Yes.
I know you originally came on to do the APRA and the open meeting stuff, but you're also going to be her attorney on this suit.
We are, and we're working with a local attorney out in Rhode Island.
Yep. Good
Geo,
friends of ours. Yep. Stephen
Yep.
Hopkins Center. Yep.
Stephen Hopkins Center, and they've been wonderful. And so, yeah, we both will be defending against this baseless lawsuit.
Nicole, how's it feel to be sued?
Well, honestly, when I have the Goldwater Institute behind me, like, I mean, it feels not as scary as it would be if I were alone. I mean, I understand why people are scared of this, but I just feel really ready to dish this out now.
Is there any doubt in your mind? We talked about this, you and I, offline, and I can't remember what you said publicly about it. But when they first went on the agenda, I think it was back in late May or June, when they first put on the agenda that they were considering suing you. We should remind everybody that at that time, and I don't even know the exact status, but there is one of the school committee members, Sarah Markey, is an executive with the Rhode Island chapter of the National Education Association. And we all just assumed that this bullyish, thuggish tactic of using the law, an APRA law, which is supposed to help citizens, trying to turn that against citizens, was clearly a union tactic. Is there any doubt in your mind that Sarah Markey and the NEA is behind this whole legal push?
No, and in fact, there's evidence that they are, because Legal Insurrection, we all know Bill Jacobson is doing a fantastic job covering this, uncovered emails showing that the school is colluding with union members to retaliate against me. So how can I have any doubt that they're behind this, and that Sarah Markey was the #1 person behind this the whole time?
Now, with pressure, your group, other parents group, our center, other coalition partners put on, there have been a number of resignations in South Kingston. The school committee for this, and probably more another topic, but the chairwoman stepped down and then was off the committee totally. Is Sarah Markey still on the school committee?
Nope, she resigned.
She resigned. I heard she took a leave of absence. I didn't know if she ever went to the final step of resigning. Jonathan, you guys, your think tank and your legal center have been involved in all aspects of education, school issues a lot over the years. So you've dealt with teacher unions who have been your adversary in many cases throughout the country. Is this typical, this union's attacking a citizen mom, tax-paying mom like this? Is this typical, or is this case in Rhode Island really something special?
I would say that the gravity and the brazenness of the assault is not typical. The way they have come after Nicole is unlike anything I've seen. Now, is it par for the course for public sector unions to do this kind of stuff, to engage in intimidation tactics, although not at this level? Yeah, I think it is. Public sector unions are a very powerful special interest group. They don't generally, in this case, the NEA does not care about parents. They don't care about students. They care about driving a radical political agenda and spending their hundreds of millions of dollars trying to push that agenda and indoctrinate those that might disagree, or try to intimidate those that might disagree. We did have a case in Arizona about 10 years ago where a similar situation happened, not involving the union. It involved a school district that essentially tried to sue parents for public records requests, and we took that up to the Arizona Court of Appeals and had it dismissed.
So we're looking at the Providence Journal story of the lawsuit. And to my recollection, other than the one radio appearance you had, Nicole, locally, that I'm aware of, so I'm asking you, you've got a lot of exposure nationally, but it seems like the local media doesn't want to touch this one too much. Other than your one appearance on WPRO and this story in the Providence Journal, which was just earlier this week on Monday. And I know you've been on a conservative radio show as well, but like the three major television local stations, have they touched this story at all?
No, the local media, they are puny hall monitors to the status quo. They don't want to challenge anything.
Puny hall monitors to the status quo. That's a good one.
Yeah. I did one interview with WPRI, Really went out of my way to do it. I was out of state. I had to reorganize furniture in my hotel room, and then they tabled the interview, which I assume they did because I didn't say anything salacious enough. So it's really a
Anything they
shame
could
because-
criticize you on, right?
yeah, and it's really a shame because, Rhode Island's a small state, and when it has a big issue that's going national, your local media should really step up to the plate, and it's been very
Yeah,
disappointing.
that's been, that's, just stick your head in the sand media around here. Status quo, exactly, lackeys. Jonathan, so Nicole mentioned legal insurrection. They're the ones who broke Nicole's story. They also broke the Ramona Bessinger Providence teacher story, which we also covered. But here is a post I just saw on their website earlier this week. Can you explain? I don't know what this means, but Bill Jacobson, who runs legal insurrection, is a lawyer himself. And he said the unions might have made a big mistake here under this anti-SLAPP statute. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, we sure are. And Bill Jacobson has done some really good work
Yes.
on this case specifically. Without getting too far into the details on this, generally anti-SLAPP statutes, and they exist in many states, protect the public's participation in the public process. And if a lawsuit is brought against somebody who's simply exercising their constitutional rights,
like Nicole,
to petition government to free speech, and the way that's defined is quite broadly, then it can very well be an anti-SLAPP violation, which can lead to expedited dismissal, as well as several other consequences for the plaintiff bringing the case.
well, could it backfire? I mean, could it just lead to the dismissal of the case? I mean, the headline of the story makes it think it could backfire somehow on the unions, or is it just a legal technicality means the case wouldn't move forward?
Well, it's not a legal technicality. It's a vehicle by which to dispose of lawsuits that impair constitutional rights. So it's a very strong legal tool that can be used in situations where somebody's going after somebody in a way that's harassing, intimidating, violative of their constitution.
Yeah, and that's another term I want to do, harassment. The lawsuit was supposedly a stop. They don't want to give up the communications because some teachers might be harassed if their names are out there. Well, Nicole's been being harassed for months now, right, Nicole? I mean, that's a little hypocritical, isn't it?
Yeah, of course. I mean, the NEA wants they have their own little private meeting about a mom, which, frankly, you go after a mom. Is there any other better definition of losers? I mean, come on. So here they are harassing me, and now that it's kind of backfiring on them, they have their tails between their legs, and I don't have a lot of sympathy for that.
This is so I guess I was asking to finish my other thought, Jonathan. I mean, have they crossed some line where there's some action by Nicole against them, along the lines of libel or defamation? Does this would this allow some return action, could it boomerang on them somehow?
They have crossed many lines, and I would expect that they're going to be answering
all right, good,
questions along those lines.
I mean, Nicole, this is really, this is just about public interest information and parental rights, right? I mean, it's kind of related but separate. And it goes back to what the real question is that Jonathan wrote about in that piece. What are they hiding? Why are they going to such an extent to hide this? All you want to know is, what are you going to be teaching my kid? I mean, you really think of, it's really that simple, yet they don't want to tell you.
Yeah,
and they want to be the parent of your kid as well, right?
Right. And their problem is that they are morally absolute. They are like people who have found a religion, and they believe that their religion is better than yours. But if you're going to indoctrinate people, then you need to start a church, not teach at a school. So this really just comes down to a separation of church and state, so to speak. And it's a separation of, I don't know, schools and families at this point. You're not the family.
Jonathan, quickly, if school districts were just transparent, posted this stuff for everybody to see, did it in a comprehensive manner. Here's the curriculum. Here's the books we used last year. Here's the books we used this year. Here's the principles or teachings whether it's a 1619 project or the 1776 project. I mean, all of this would be moot, right? Now, you've done a report, your group, the Goldwater Institute, which is just a tremendous freedom fighter in this country. I have so much respect for everything you guys have done over the year. But you guys put out a report about, curriculum wars, how we need academic transparency, and you've even got model legislation for states to adopt. Can you just quickly summarize all that from what you guys are doing?
Sure. And thanks, Mike. I appreciate the kind words. Thanks for being such a great ally too. Yeah, I mean, the concept is really simple. It's called academic transparency. If you're a publicly funded school district, you have an obligation to parents, to taxpayers, to students, to make curriculum lesson plans available, to post them online in an easily accessible format so that parents like Nicole, when she's making an enrollment decision and is trying to figure out whether they're going to send their child to school A or school B, et cetera, can go right online, see exactly what the school district is going to teach, and then make that decision. This would require school districts to do this across the state, and we're advocating for its passage in Arizona and many other places.
So have any of these model legislations been considered or passed yet? I know it's early in the process.
It's quite early in the process. They have been considered by 4 or 5 states, and I suspect in the upcoming legislative session, they will take on a higher degree of urgency.
All right, final questions in this segment for Nicole. John, and then Nicole's going to sign off. We're going to bring on Judge Flanders in just a minute and do some legal talk between people who really know what they're talking about legally. But Nicole, this whole experience, how has it changed your worldview of society, government, public schools? First of all, just quickly on that. I mean, you could never have anticipated this.
My whole life has changed. I was getting ready to learn how to garden before all this happened, and now I'm getting ready to campaign for school committee members that I think are going to be better for our town's values. And I'm getting ready to participate in government for the rest of my life because I didn't come this far to be under the thumb of a Rhode Island school board. And I'm not going to go the rest of my life just waiting for some other government entity to try to put me under their thumb either.
Just a yes or no on this one. I wasn't planning to ask you this, but you just said it. Is there any doubt in your mind that this curriculum push, whether it's critical race theory, gender equity, or the over-sexualization of our kids, all that indoctrination stuff, is there any question in your mind that that is not coming from the Rhode Island Department of Education being pushed down on these districts, or do you think these school districts are acting on their own?
No, it's definitely coming from RIDE. They passed a bill in a law in 2019 that gave full authority to, Angelica and Fonde Green.
They're exploiting that, aren't they? Yep.
Right. And I think the school boards are more than happy to, abdicate responsibility for all of this wonderful indoctrination.
All right. Now, I said I'd come back to this. So what did you end up, you did this because you wanted to know about sending your child to public schools or not. Are you going to enroll your child in South Kingston public schools or not?
No, I pulled her out. I put her in private school. I asked them if they do any critical race theory, any gender theory. They said no. I got a tour, something I never got.
They gave you an answer.
Yeah, it all happened in, like 30 minutes.
Wow.
Didn't have to spend,
Imagine that.
Yeah.
All right. And finally, Nicole, and then we'll have Jonathan stay with us. Message to other parents who are concerned about what public schools are teaching their kids.
Ask your school all your questions first. And if they don't answer your questions or if they give you non-answers, submit those public records requests, and be sure to submit public records requests on the communications of NEA members, AFT members, and school officials and school employees, because now we know that the union is participating in the curriculum decisions of your school. So their participation should be subject to public disclosure. It's a matter of public concern. So you get to see all those emails, and you should ask for them.
All right. And before we let you go, not a comment, but I just want you both on as I say this. Here's how great both of you are. Nicole's been great all along. Jonathan, you're going to be taking an extraordinary leap, literally a leap across the country. On August 22nd, our center, but starting with Nicole's group and a couple other parents group in South County, Charahoe parents, Westerly parents, we're holding sort of a seminar town hall meeting. It's a private invitation only. Jonathan is coming all the way out from Arizona to Rhode Island to speak to that group, to give them tips on putting in public records requests will be one of the things. Nicole, you will also be a panelist, as well as a few other parents. So if you're listening, and if you are a leader, if you are involved at the top of a parent or citizen or taxpayer group, and you'd like to attend this meeting, it's only for leaders of groups. It's private. Email me at info@rifreedom.org. Let us know who you know in the network or all the parents groups, and you can come and you can hear from Nicole and Jonathan. You can get the parental view, you can get the legal view. So Nicole, thank you for joining us today. We wish you good luck and everything. I don't know if I should be happy or sad that you've grown to such a national figure, but it's tragic either way. But thank you for being courageous, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Okay. Let's bring on Judge Robert Flanders, who I should mention is a board member of our center. He's been on the show many times. And he's also the namesake, if you would, of the Flanders Legal Center for Freedom. Oh, I can see he's got his Flanders for Senate hat on. He was a candidate, of course, for the United States Senate. Bob, welcome back to In the Dugout. What did you think of what you just heard?
Well, I'm suffering here from a case of lawyer envy because Nicole strikes me as an ideal client, and she's so articulate, so intelligent, so thoughtful, and so committed that any lawyer would want her to be a client in this situation. So, as I say, I think the Goldwater folks and Jonathan are lucky to have such a good client, and she's a terrific spokesperson for the cause that she's championing.
Now, I'm sure you've had a lot of, during your tenure in when you were Supreme Court Associate Justice of the Rhode Island Supreme Court, you probably, I don't know, did they have open records request laws back then and open meetings laws back then? Wait, that was back before the flood, right, Bob?
I'm not that antediluvian, Michael. Yes, they did have them. They may have been in a different form slightly. They've been, of course, tinkered with over the years. But yes, there were such laws, and so this case will present an interesting issue for the courts to grapple with.
Jonathan, you mentioned earlier that Rhode Island's records request laws weren't quite as robust, and by robust, I assume favorable to citizens as in other states. Can you talk about what makes Rhode Island, what could be improved about Rhode Island's laws, both on the open meetings or whether or not, and on the records request, and then we'll get a comment from Bob on that as well.
Sure, yeah, and I don't want to be misunderstood. Rhode Island's open records laws are broad. All public records are presumptively open to the public. There's a presumption in favor of disclosure. They must be disclosed unless one of the exemptions that's in the law applies. Where I said they could be improved is some of the exemptions appear for discrete categories of records, many of which are not at issue in this case. So for example, there's an exemption for elected officials. That shouldn't be there. Just as a matter of policy, the business of elected officials should be open to the public. But all that said, the framework built around this, the legal framework, is that this is public information. It's presumed open to the public. And where there's been exceptions to that rule, those should be eliminated statutorily, but the case law is very clear that the public has the benefit of these laws. They're put in place to protect the public, and that's a good thing.
Now, Bob, I know you can't be, I'm not asking you to make speculate on an outcome, but you've got obviously a heck of a lot of experience with the Rhode Island judicial system. So let me ask you specifically about two of the cases we brought up here. First of all, you and I have talked a lot and have been frustrated about the lack of standing, usually as a negative, where citizens don't have the right in this state to address, to file their grievances in the form of a lawsuit because our standing laws are just so narrow. In this case, standing laws Jonathan believes could work to our advantage with the lawsuit against Nicole, claiming that the NEA as a third party just wouldn't have standing in the case. Anything to add or, to that sentiment?
Yeah, I think that's a critical threshold issue that will need to be decided by the courts. I noticed that there's been requests for preliminary temporary relief, injunctive relief, and I was going to ask Jonathan where that stands. Has there been any meetings yet with the judge who's been assigned to this case for temporary relief? Because that would be where the first instance that this would come up, and that is a critical issue.
No, Judge. We're in the process now of scheduling a hearing on the union's temporary restraining order and request for a preliminary injunction. But as the judge is really well aware, the first question in that inquiry is what's the likelihood of success ultimately on the union's legal claims. And there's a whole lot of reasons that they're not likely to succeed here. But one of the threshold, perhaps a critical threshold question is, can they even be here? And it seems that Rhode Island case law, including from Judge Flanders' court, is quite clear that the public records law does not allow this type of posture.
So
Go
that'll
ahead.
be the first thing that the judge has to deal with. And yeah, the concern is that allowing third-party groups like the union to get their oar in the water here could really blow the doors off the public meeting landscape and involve all sorts of third parties in these adjudications, which would complicate and delay things, which raises another issue is what's happening in the meantime. Is this advisory body continue to meet in secret and have things been able to go along normally in South Kingston where this is occurring, as if these lawsuits and questions with the Attorney General haven't even been raised? What's going on there?
All right, can I hold off on that 1 second, but I want to go back to the lawsuit, not the complaint, for a second. So, because I think I just learned something, and while you guys were talking legalese, I think I just learned something from you guys, but I want to put it into layman's terms and see if I interpreted it properly. So injunctive relief or a temporary restraining order usually is only issued by a judge if he feels there's a pretty good outcome that the plaintiff will win the case. If the judge doesn't think the plaintiff ultimately has a good chance of succeeding, then they usually won't even consider injunctive relief. Did I say that properly?
Yes.
Okay, see, I never knew that before. I never knew on what grounds do you offer injunctive relief or don't you? So I just learned something today. Thank you.
Yeah, you got to show irreparable harm unless the relief is granted, and you've got to show likelihood of success and that the public interest calls for such relief. So yeah, it's a high burden that the plaintiff, in this case the union, would have to meet. And as Jonathan has suggested, there are a number of reasons why the likelihood of success aspect of this is going to be extremely problematic.
Either of you can weigh in, is harassment, that's what that was the media's headline. I don't know if that was I think that was in the union's complaint, but is potential harassment of teachers for something they do publicly or any public official, that's very speculative. Can that ever be legal grounds for any kind of legal relief?
Well, potentially, yeah, teachers could be harassed, and just like any public official could be harassed. One of the issues here that—
But for your public statements, right? If as a public official, if you say something stupid, you should get some blowback for it, shouldn't you? That's kind of the way I look at it.
Yeah, well, that wouldn't necessarily be harassment. But if people were picketing their home and throwing eggs at the family when they left to go to church, and you can imagine all sorts of physical harassment. Sure, but I want to focus on one thing that is at issue here indirectly, and that is, can members of the public, under the auspices of the Open Meetings Law and Public Records Act, file innumerable requests with public authorities? At some point, does that amount to harassment? Is there an abuse of the ability to ask for public records by submitting thousands upon, I'm not saying it happened in this case, but submitting thousands upon thousands of requests and tying the public authority in knots by, having enlisting friends to
Yep.
submit multiple requests. So,
That's a
there's
great
another
question,
side
because
to the
that's their
story.
claim, Jonathan. They've been claiming that publicly. You're overburdening us. So, what's the precedent there? Great question, Bob.
So that is in the posture that this case is. Let's remember the union brought the case. The district, the public entity, did not bring this lawsuit contending that is burdensome. The response, of course, is that the proper mechanism there would be for a school district to deny a request within the bounds of the law. And if the public records requester felt that was an unlawful denial, at that point, the public records requester could bring a case to compel production. But there's nothing in the law that allows either the public body, and certainly not a third party, to preemptively try and stop the public's right to access public information.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good response. And I assume that if that had happened here, that eventually Nicole, with your representation, may have eventually brought a suit against the district for non-compliance with reasonable requests, and that would have been, the proper way. But I assume your first tactic here is to wait for the Attorney General to respond. Is that right?
So for the Open Meetings Act, Judge, yeah, there is an open complaint right now with the Attorney General's office. So his office has an opportunity to issue an opinion as to whether the law was violated or not.
Okay.
Judge Jonathan said in his comments, I'm sure you heard it, that it seems to him that if you look at Rhode Island's open meetings laws, that this board is not exempt from that. This school committee created board that's funded with public money. Does it appear to you to be as clear-cut a case?
Yes, and I think Jonathan cited in his letter to the Attorney General the appropriate authorities, which make clear, among other things, that even advisory bodies like this one to public entities like the school board are subject to the open meetings law request, because they're in a rather unique position to influence policy. And so public policy needs to have some public input, and it's perfectly appropriate for them to be subject to the Open Meetings Act. So I think he's absolutely right about that.
A couple quick questions at a more general national level. And I don't want to dig far, just get your opinion, maybe even just a yes or a no. But is there increasingly in schools, whether it's teaching about sex, teaching about sexual preferences, teaching about racial preferences, how to feel about people of different races, all kinds of related issues, that the government seems to be, and these government schools seem to be intruding in the space of what was traditionally areas that parents taught their kids about. Is there any legal precedent? Is there any boundary legally drawn to where schools can go, or where schools should be off limits and say that's the domain of the family and the parents? Is there anything out there, or is it a wide open, wild, wild west right now?
So I can take a crack at that. There's U.S. Supreme Court precedent going back over a century that is very clear that parents have a constitutional right to raise their children as the family determines is appropriate. Society of Sisters case is the big one on point. Now, in terms of policies, I mean, this is why it's important to put in place things like academic transparency, or to be engaged with local school boards, because they're the ones that are setting the curriculum, setting the state, and then the school boards setting what's going to be taught in classrooms. And unless citizens are engaged and are asking these questions and are advocating for certain policy positions, it's possible for school boards to put in place a lot of objectionable material.
Yeah, one of the things that I heard Nicole say, which is very upsetting, is that the very body that I formerly chaired, the Board of Education for the state of Rhode Island.
Sorry, I forgot to mention that. Yeah.
For elementary and secondary education, is apparently, according to Nicole at least, exercising some influence, if not a heavy hand, in some curriculum determinations that bear on what we've been talking about. That's concerning because, this critical race theory and other such highly charged political indoctrination campaigns would be something I think would be very troubling for the state at its highest educational level to be involved with.
All right, a few more areas I'd like to cover with you each. At a higher level, before I get to those other final ones, again, either of you aware, it seems so obvious to us, to Nicole, I'm sure to both of you, that the CRT, this racial equities teachings are racist in and of themselves when you categorize a whole group of people, white, whether you want to call it white shame or white supremacy, that in probably not the way it was originally written, but according to the four corners of the paper, it would seem to me, and I've heard discussion that somehow that could be a violation itself of the Civil Rights Act. Anytime you get into any kind of racial stereotyping in law or in public teaching like that, does anyone have an opinion on that?
Well, that's not an issue I've explored. I will say, just as a matter of policy, it's people should be judged by the content of their character, as Dr. King said, not by the color of their skin. It seems like CRT is at odds with that basic notion. I happen to view the United States of America as a fundamentally good country that is a beacon for hope for the world, not as a fundamentally evil country. But I think those are, and I think CRT is probably at odds with that position. But setting that, kind of setting aside the merits or demerits of CRT and some of these other radical political philosophies, at the end of the day, at least in these cases, this is just about the public's right to know. I mean, whether it's going to be taught or not, parents have a right to know that.
All right, so let's have that quick debate. So there's legislation. I think it's interesting. There's two ways to attack this. There's legislation. We just saw earlier this week on the news that the Senate, whether it survives or not, but the Senate is part of the big infrastructure bill, passed an amendment that said no funding, no federal funding for anything to teach us critical race theory. There's a state bill, Bill 601, House Bill 6010, brought by Representative Patricia Morgan, that would at the statewide level ban localities or public schools from teaching anything, that categorizes groups of racial people in any good or bad way. Your approach, Jonathan, appears to be, we don't need those laws. We just need transparency and let local parents, local officials, and deal with it on their own. So here's the question: is it an all of the above approach our side should be taking? Should we philosophically be looking at transparency versus state level, kind of preemptive? There's that debate over when should a state preempt what local governments do, because there's this theory out there. It's not a constitutional theory. It's just a belief that local government is better government. Not all the time, in my view. But should the state be preempting localities, or should the state just be demanding full transparency and let the chips fall where they fall? So, Bob, let's start with you. Your opinion on that question.
Well, I agree that the first issue here should be full disclosure of what is being taught, and what is being prescribed, and who's doing the prescribing. Is it the unions? Is it the Board of Education? Is it the local school committee? Who's prescribing what? So disclosure, I think, is the first step. But beyond that, things like, for example, race, slavery, Jim Crow laws. You can't talk about history in this country without getting into the reality of racial discrimination as reflected in slavery and Jim Crow, and the Supreme Court decisions discussing the subject, integrating the schools. I mean, these are all fair subjects for education. And so, we've had a long history, even teaching evolution. You recall the monkey Scopes trial, when there was controversy over whether children should be taught evolution because it was supposedly against the Bible and things like that. So this is a controversial area, but I think as Jonathan and his group have been pressing, let's put all the cards on the table. Let's see what is being taught, who's pressing to have these things taught, and then make some decisions about, where you draw the line between history and philosophy and critical race theories things. I think that's an important distinction.
Good point. Jonathan, your thoughts on preemptive statewide laws versus local transparency?
I think I'll comment on that broadly because I think it's a really important issue. And I think it's an issue a lot of people misunderstand. And by the way, I echo the judge's views on this. Start with transparency and then figure out the line drawing. But that said, I think for whatever reason, there's this sort of knee-jerk reaction from oftentimes from conservative circles that local control is necessarily a good thing.
Right.
Look, I mean, local control is still control. And what we know is that local entities are highly susceptible to special interest capture. You see it in this case where the unions essentially campaign for, advocate, support school board members.
There has a member on the board, the school board. Yeah, has executives on the school board.
They are very, very susceptible to special interest capture. They're very susceptible to NIMBYism. Yep. And when those two forces converge, oftentimes individual liberties, individual rights can be in the crosshairs. So I think as a matter of policy, state preemption on matters that protect individual rights is not only a tolerable thing, but is a good thing and ought to be explored in the context of education and in many other areas, frankly, permitting, occupational licensing, private property rights. I think that can oftentimes be a good thing.
Yeah, that's a great debate, really, from the conservative circles. Is when is state preemptive action warranted and when is, and there are some guidelines. We're not going to get into that now. All right, last topic, gentlemen. If you can just give us a couple more minutes. In my view, compared with the fact when you consider that in Rhode Island and everywhere last spring, mostly because of teacher unions, some out of caution, teachers refused to even teach kids in person, and the unions made damn well sure of it. Then we know they're forcing mask mandates, vaccine mandates, or some kind of passport wherever they can. Teachers unions pushing for that as a condition to teach again in person this fall. So parents are going to have to deal with that. And now we know that they're, as Jonathan, you've said, and as Judge and I have talked about, now they're pushing everything from CRT to the whole radical left agenda. They've said as much publicly. They've said it publicly that the number one priority for our union is to advance the social equity agenda. All those things combined, can there be any more doubt that if we're going to force all this crap onto families and students, that families should have the choice to take the funds designated for their children's education and redirect those funds to a school of their choice, whether that's public, private, or at home? Can there be any more doubt that is the fair solution if this is the world we're living in?
Certainly that accords with the freedom and prosperity agenda that our center espouses, which is that we want to empower people to make informed choices. And to do that, you need transparency, you need information. And yes, I think the money should follow the student. That would inject more competition into our schools, and one would hope that would yield better outcomes at all levels. But of course, that agenda is resisted tooth and nail by unions and other entrenched interests. But I think that's in the best interest of kids, which is, I think, where we all ought to be coming from.
Jonathan, before you weigh in on that, and this will be the last word of our discussion today, again, let me toot your horn a little bit. Goldwater Institute and your legal center, both from a policy point of view and from a legal point of view, have been defenders of educational freedom advocates for education, probably greater than certainly any state-based organization in the country, and probably on a par with any national group as well. So many of the school choice and educational freedom initiatives we see in states have survived challenges from the unions and other groups like that, and defended successfully all the way up to the Supreme Court by the Goldwater Institute. Jonathan, you've probably been in on some of those cases. So let me first say that you guys are probably the greatest defenders of educational freedom that I know. So your thought, I know what yours is going to be, but doesn't just this make the case for why educational freedom for families is needed?
Yeah, I mean, I try to be a half full type of view of the world. And I think if anything good came out of the last year or so, it's that parents are really waking up to what's going on. Yeah. And it really isn't a controversial matter that parents sitting around the dinner table are in the best position to choose what's best for their students and their families. And school choice is a very major part of the answer to this, whether it's education savings accounts or charter schools. Parents having the ability to choose schools and they're not relegated to the school where they happen to live is going to be a very, very important part of freedom for our families going forward.
Well, I think we've succeeded. We have two of the greatest legal minds in the country talking, and you didn't get into too much legalese. I understood it. I think our listeners I want to congratulate you guys for that. That is awesome. I was very scared about having both of you. I thought you were just gonna leave us in the dust. So
I think Jonathan and I both tried to pitch it at a low level, knowing our audience.
I was
knowing me,
knowing
me anyway. Jonathan Richards, Goldwater Institute, Robert Flanders of Flanders Legal Center for Freedom, former Supreme Court State Justice, and that's right, Chairman of the Board of Education. Wow, I keep forgetting that. Thank you for joining me in the dugout today. Good luck in all your legal pursuits.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Judge.
So as you can see, folks, this fight is far from over. Parents are rising up. Lawyers are coming to the aid. The media is not on board yet. The media is still protecting the far left agenda, at least the mainstream corporate media. But I can tell you right now, we're on the right side. We're on the side of right, I should say. The citizens' voices, when they get loud enough, as they are, will make a difference. And good-willed, good-intentioned lawyers, very capable lawyers, will help speed that along in the courts or through public pressure. Again, this is a story, this in-depth story of Nicole Solas has never been told before anywhere in America like you've seen it today. Just bits and pieces here or there. We're the first to put it together. Stay with us on In the Dugout. We'll be having some more special editions over the course of the summer. We'll get into our regular routine again a little bit later this fall. As we relaunch In the Dugout, you'll hear about that in the coming weeks, more about that. But again, local media totally ignoring Nicole Solas, this massive news. But we're going to win this fight. Stay with us because we're going to chronicle it all the way through. For In the Dugout, Mike Stenhouse. See you next game.
Beautiful, Sten.